Just going to check it. We should be good any second. And here we are. Awesome. Okie doke. And we'll mute this. Cool. Welcome to another edition of the Highbury Squad. And wow, football is back and it's in full force, and there's a lot of stuff happening, lots of games. And, you know, post games, they're running thick and fast, and they're coming to us thick and fast. And I always like to kind of stop and take a beat and have the kind of shows where you talk a little bit about football and how we integrate that into Arsenal Football Club as well. And I couldn't think of a better. I've been trying to get Matt on for a whole month, and we're finally here. And unfortunately, Kevin and Amanda can't be with us, but I have my wingman today, and that's Kris Carpenter from A Bergkamp Wonderland. Kris, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Soph, pleasure. Thanks for having me on again.
Awesome. And a guy who I interviewed, I don't know, probably the first time was maybe 8-10 years ago when we were doing World Football Daily. Always loved his work. He's one of the connoisseurs of French football, and his new book, and you're going to correct me, I'll leave all the French pronunciations to you, Sacré Bleu, from one of my favorite sports journalists and authors, Matt Spiro, who I like to call Spiro because I'm Greek. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sophie. Very kind of you. And it is Spiro and not Spiro.
Wow.
I think it's TalkSport who it doesn't matter how many times I say it's Spiro, they always call me Spiro.
That's probably casual doing that just for jokes, but
that was a very nice intro. But, you know, it's really busy, like you say, football-wise, but nothing's happening here. So, you know, I know we've been trying to get this set up for a good few weeks, but you've been the busy ones more than me because there's no French football going on.
You know,
so it's great to be on.
Before we get stuck into the book and Arsenal's French influence, are there regrets about that? Did they cut the umbilical cord too soon?
Yeah, there are regrets that the decision was made so quickly. And yeah, it's one of those things. I think when it happened, it was at the height of the pandemic, and everybody thought, you know, health first. This is, you know, this is crazy to think about playing football. The government had made this very hardline announcement that, you know, there would be no sport in front of crowds and before September. So people sort of accepted it. And then as the other countries and the other big leagues started setting everything up, there was, quite a lot of people thinking, well, hang on, what are we doing? And and it sort of highlighted the mess that is French football a little bit insofar as all of the different personalities. In France, you have the president. You know, I know we have presidents of clubs in England as well, but they're big media personalities. A lot of them have got big egos, and there was just all this kind of public squabbling, and the French League and the Federation, you know, didn't really sort of manage to bring everybody together. So it's been a bit ugly the last month or so.
And has it gotten ugly with the relegation situation?
Yeah.
Because I can imagine a little bit like some of the EFL teams, Tranmere in particular, you know, kind of it being called on you when there still are games to play and there's a shout that you could survive. Can't imagine. Yeah. How's that going? Are there litigation?
Well, I mean, Amiens are still fighting. They were 19th. They're still fighting in the courts. There's been all sorts of different legal battles going on. And actually the highest court did rule that the relegation would not stand, and it has been suspended. But there's now been another vote among the 20 clubs, and the majority are voting for the two teams to go down, and therefore it to remain a 20-team league next season. So Toulouse have been arguing as well. They were so bad this season, and they've been pretty much relegated. You know, not mathematically, but they were down sort of from November onwards. So they're not getting so much sympathy, but Amiens was still in with a shout. So it's tough because, you start a competition. It's a 38-week competition, and that's what you expect to be judged on, not 28 matches. So a lot of sympathy, but, you know, that it's going ahead now, and there's no way that they're going to be able to turn it around.
Wow. And Kris, you follow the league religiously, and you have your hipster podcast as well, where you talk French football too. You know, we've seen Bundesliga get back to it, Serie A and Premier League. It really is a shame for football fans, not only in France, but people who now follow Liga around the world. It's grown, quite well over the last 4 or 5 years, in particular in the US as well, with regards to particular players. What's your take on it, just as a fan point of view, from it being incomplete?
Yeah, it's ruined my Sunday nights and my Friday evenings for a start. It's just not the same. I should also give a very brief semi plug to my other colleagues at French Football Weekly, because that's the other podcast that I'm part of, and we were discussing it the other day in our group, and just saying that it just doesn't feel the same when you've got basically all the other quote unquote major leagues going in around Europe, and you haven't got the French football to enjoy. And I think for all its detractors, and there are many, as I'm sure Matt would sort of say as well, the talent in particular, the young players that come out of France, and the players that often feed the major leagues, the sort of quote of the feeder league has been gone around for a number of years. And although I don't necessarily fully agree with that, you can't deny the amount of young players and young talents that come out of France, and we've been missing that. And the atmosphere in France is something else I miss. It's something that goes under the radar a bit, I think, but the atmosphere in French stadia is often really, really good, particularly when you're watching games at the moment where there is silence or horrible fake crowd noise, which I'm not a fan of. It does leave a major hole. And like Matt said, I do think France went a little bit early, although I must confess I was on the side of saying that I don't think football should have come back at all. And I do wonder how much of the French decision was based upon almost sort of off the back of the Dutch and the Belgians saying, no, we're out, and then France were very much next to go. And I do feel like the other three major leagues, particularly Spain and England, are very much money motivated. So it was a shame that it went early. And as I say, it's ruined my weekends, and roll on August. And who knows, maybe France will be a bit more watched next year because they'll be back slightly earlier than the other major leagues.
Yeah. And it's, that leads in beautifully to getting stuck into Matt's book, because I thought the Euros this year could have seen France, kind of really reinforce their domination of international football. But let's just start at the beginning here, Matt, a little bit with your book. I don't think people sometimes realize how tough it is to write a book. I've been in the film and TV industry for almost 30 years, and I've worked on movies that are based on true stories. But in movies, you can get away with a little bit of suspension of disbelief. In a book, you really can't. So when you kind of sat down and you were putting this together to give everyone a little bit of a fly on the wall, did the title come before or after? Because sometimes as you're doing interviews, things evolve and change. And you can educate me, but Sacré Bleu seems like a bit of a Greek saying where it means a lot of different things. But ultimately, I don't know, I thought it meant damn it. And it felt like it was positive but negative. Talk to us a little bit about how that came together and how you came with the title. And we'll get stuck into some football.
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny, the name, because the people in France sort of look at it and think Sacré Bleu, that's, just a sort of cliche. And also, if you're going to say bleu, it needs to have an S on the end because it's Les Bleus. So I was really pleased when Philippe Auclair made a comment on Twitter about it being a very clever name that people maybe don't quite get, because Sacré Bleu kind of, it is an expression in English, and it's more, I think, to express sort of, surprise or something incredible happens or crazy. Oh, Sacré Bleu. And because it tells the story of the last 20, 25 years, the modern history of the French national team, it's quite appropriate because, well, there are two things. They play in blue, and they have been sacré. They've been twice world champions in that time, but also it's been so eventful, so many ups and downs. The name, I think I got the name quite early. I was thinking initially, because I wanted to tell the story from France's 98 win to their 2018 win. 1998 was an enormous year for French football, not just because they won the World Cup on home soil, but in terms of the way football was perceived in France. It doesn't really have the sort of rich cultural history that English football has. They have had great teams in the past. They won the Euros in 1984, but French football only became kind of like massively popular, like to the entire country, from 98 onwards. Before then, it was seen as sort of quite a lower class thing, and people would sort of secretly, read L'Équipe and sort of, hide it in on the metro, because that was the only place you could read about football. But then it became acceptable, and these guys all became heroes. So initially I was thinking, well, it's got to be my common sort of thread through the book is going to be Didier Deschamps, who was the the captain and, 98, then the manager in 2018. And then I thought, well, hang on, Kylian just started scoring more and more goals. And then I started thinking, what could be a slightly sexier kind of person to have on the front of the book? And Kylian Mbappé was born in 98, was the star, one of the stars, certainly in 2018, is probably the future of the French national team. Is going to be one of the greatest players, I think, in world football. And it's fascinating as well in terms of his background, in terms of what's happened in the last 20 years. We've had all sorts of social unrest. A lot of the footballers come from suburbs like Bondy, which is northeast of Paris, where Kylian comes from. And there's been a really strong link between the football team, the French national team, and the sort of social history of France. It's a very sort of immigrant heavy team from that 98 team now as well, even though I think, the 2018 team, it's very much different, because we're talking about second, third generation immigrants, and the likes of Pogba and Benjamin Mendy see themselves very much as French. So, and it has been perceived differently. I think in 98, everyone was talking about the Black Blanc Bleu team, whereas in 2018 in France, there was no discussion about their origins. They were just France. So the comments, it's a lot about Kylian Mbappé and his upbringing, and how he has developed into this very, very level-headed, phenomenal, sort of incredibly driven footballer. But of course, telling the story of the French national team and French football as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I throw it to Kris, the only player I've ever thought, because, at Arsenal, everyone's going to be the next Thierry Henry, right? Everyone's going to be the next global superstar. And we've had Ozil, of course, who's a star, but he just hasn't been that great on the pitch. And for me, if there's only one player in the world that I would put a stamp on and say he could be an Henry, it's Mbappe. He's just a wonderful player to watch. And from my point of view, I would actually love it if he stayed in France, because I think, some of the things that I miss about Arsenal is that British influence. And I think it's not being a nationalist, it's being, you talk about foundation and where players come from, and understanding background and culture and football culture. And I think France, in some ways, why don't France get the same respect as Spain, considering what Spanish football has done and what they've won World Cup, Euros? You can take 98, you could take the Euro team and then the World Cup team. Why do you think it is? And if you look at some of the players that have come out of Spain and gone into other leagues, granted, yes, it's been impressive. But also, as Kris said at the beginning of the show, if you look at the talent that's come out of France over the last 20 years, it's been insane. Why do you think the respect level isn't the same? Or am I misreading that?
No, you're right. You're right. But the main reason is money. The main reason that the players are not staying for longer is money. But the league definitely deserves more respect. And French players, they certainly used to grow up dreaming of playing for Marseille and Paris Saint-Germain, and that was, that was certainly the case in the 90s and the noughties. It's changed a little bit with the Premier League sort of taking over, and actually Arsenal contributed a lot to that with Vieira, Henry, Pires, and all the French boys. So you've got like Giroud's generation. I talked to Giroud in the book about that, how he would sort of grow up watching this Sunday night highlight show where they talked about all the major leagues, and like so many French kids growing up, he was just transfixed by the Premier League. And he said to me, I loved watching, Thierry and Manu, Robert and the boys, and I followed Arsenal. And then he kind of ruined it all by saying, I liked Liverpool too. But, but yeah, it is that. But you're right, Sophie. So Mbappe staying there, staying in France, it is great. But we're also, realistic. PSG can financially keep somebody like Mbappe happy, but as long as they're not winning the Champions League and not even getting sort of beyond the quarterfinals, we'll see if they do that this year. Mbappe is going to want to move to Real Madrid at some point. And I mean, Arsenal were close, Sophie. This is not going to make you feel much better, but I think everyone thinks Mbappe and Arsenal would have been a great fit.
How close really was that, Matt?
Arsene was the way he had face-to-face talks with him. This is before he signed his first professional contract with Monaco. And he blames it on Claude Makelele, who was briefly Monaco's sporting director and managed to convince Mbappé to sign for Monaco at that time. And he was only there for sort of 6 months. So had Makelele not been at Monaco, we may have had Kylian. I mean, sadly, because I think it could have been a match made in heaven, but sadly, because of Arsenal's situation, because of Mbappe's situation, it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime in the next few years. So,
but there's no doubt, is there, Kris, that Arsene Wenger not only revolutionized English football, and Sir Alex Ferguson says that out loud, as do many great managers who've managed in the Premier League, from a style point of view, from a nutritional, how players take care of themselves point of view, but he really did spawn this generation of French players, didn't he, Kris, that just fell in love with the Arsenal. And Matt's foreword is written by Wenger, and I'd love to get your take on that in a second, Matt. But as badly as it ended for Arsene, the influence that he had in these players coming to our club, Kris, was quite incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was huge. It was absolutely massive. It had a huge influence on me as well. I get a lot of stick, and I mean a lot of stick, and I don't know if Matt gets the same, but being an Englishman who supports France, I get a lot of stick. And whenever anyone asks me and says, oh, you're born in England, how can you not support England? And I say, well, there's no Arsenal players in the England team, so I'm not going to support Chelsea, Liverpool, and Spurs players. God no. But B, I always say because of Arsene Wenger, because for me, growing up, when Arsene arrived, he changed the culture of the club, as you said there, particularly with Arsenal. He changed the English game as well. But it was that French Revolution. I still remember researching Gilles Grimandi and Manu Petit when they first came in. And Gilles Grimandi was described as a tenacious left back, which I don't think I ever saw that in him. And Petit was described as a left back wanting to be a midfielder. That one was probably a bit closer to the mark in the end. But I remember when Arsene first arrived, and it was Rémi Garde and Patrick Vieira were the first two through the door. Rémi Garde was sort of deemed a bit of a journeyman in France and not really a player who was going to do too much. But I think he proved to be quite an influential figure in terms of what Patrick had in his development. I think he was the older head to bring through this kid in Vieira, who really, unless you were an AC Milan reserve follower, nobody knew who this kid was. And I still remember his debut at Sheffield Wednesday, and he just came on and just completely dominated that game. And I remember sort of turning to my friend at the time saying, we got a player here. And little did we know we'd had a player and a winner and a captain as well. And Arsene was just so much, obviously because of his knowledge of the French game. That was probably where a lot of this came from. But some of the unheralded players that Arsene brought into the club as well, Sylvain Wiltord was one that immediately leaps to mind for me. He got a lot of stick for not being a big name, but he got some crucial goals for us in that season that he came in. And I think Arsene always had an eye on the French market, and probably to his detriment in the end, some of the players maybe weren't. If you look at like Park Ju-young, for example, I think he was one that probably we could have dipped away from in a moto. I think he had at Monaco as well. So yeah, his influence was huge, and he was what sort of made me go, do you know what? There's a lot of players in France here. I'm gonna follow the French game a bit more, and that was what led into me following the national team and Liga. And for last season, luckily only for one season, Ligue 2, where I got my Lorient links was from Jeremy Aliadière, who Arsene also brought through, and that's where I kind of got that link from, and later Laurent Koscielny as well. So yeah, it's huge influence on me as an Arsenal fan and as a French football fan. I think Arsene can be traced to the roots of that for sure.
It really is incredible.
Sophie, sorry.
Yes,
I'm just going to say, sorry, just bouncing off Kris. I think the impact Arsene had, at the beginning was unbelievable. Like you talked about the French, in terms of his knowledge of the French market, also the contacts he had through Jean-Marc Guillou, who was his very close friend who set up the academy in Abidjan and helped Arsenal get Kolo Touré and Emmanuel Eboué as well after that. I think the impact was diluted a bit because slowly and surely people caught up. They started scouting more in France. And you mentioned Park Ju-young and Marouane Chamakh, another one. It became much harder for Arsene to sort of find these gems who were unheard of, or there would suddenly be huge competition. But the impact at the beginning was unbelievable. And, just going back to Sophie's original question, I mean, I don't know if I would be in France if Arsene Wenger hadn't gone to Arsenal. I think it had such a massive, has had such a massive impact on my life. I'm not saying I moved to France because of Arsene and because of Arsenal's French influence. But I mean, I was at university at the time. I was going home and away to Arsenal matches. And I was sort of eating out of Arsene's hand. I thought he was like this god that had been sent to transform Arsenal Football Club. And, sadly, the second decade wasn't quite as good as the first. But, I've still got enormous respect for him. And I was so happy that he agreed to speak to me for the book and to let me use his words as the forward. Okay,
cool. So let me play Amanda's question, because that leads into, I think, why a lot of us really love Arsene as well. It's kind of like he's more than just a football manager. He just seems like an epic human being who understands people and life. And I'll play this one for you first. Oopsies. Hold on one second. It'll be help if I turn up the volume, right?
Amanda here. Sorry I can't be on the show with Sophie and yourself tonight. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it, but I'm sure Sophie's looking after you. Anyway, just wanted to know what you thought of Mr. Wenger when you met him. I met him probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, maybe 7, can't remember, in a very strange situation. It was like a press conference, and I asked him many questions, but I was absolutely blown away by his demeanour, the way he was. He won me over completely, even though I ended up wanting change. So I want to know what you actually thought of him as a person, as a manager and everything. Okay, enjoy the show. Bye.
He has that
good
effect.
Question. I would give a similar answer to Amanda. I mean, the first time I saw him was, the first time I was in the same room as him was, I think, the first AGM. Don't ask me why I was there. I was starting my journalism career, so it would have been in 2000. And anyway. And just the charisma this guy had. He was sitting talking to shareholders, lots of sort of wealthy people had all these questions. They came in, a bit agitated and all this, and he had everyone eating out of his hand, and just so much charm, so much charisma. And so I've had the pleasure of interviewing him a few times because he works with beIN Sports. And I've been assigned to the Arsene interview a few times, which is always a fantastic pleasure. He just loves, everyone's said it a million times, he just loves football, and he just loves talking about football. And in terms of the book, as soon as I explained to him what it was, I had a copy of the cover, and immediately he sort of looked at that, thought it was a picture of Zidane and Mbappé, thought that was quite interesting. Asked me a few questions about it, and I said, so I'd love to, have a chat with you at some point. Do you think we could organize that? And, I think he'd already done a couple of hours of interviewing before. And he just looked at his watch and he said, let's do it now. And I was like, okay. So it's kind of like, I took my luck, tried my luck a little bit. And then I was like, okay, great. I've prepared a few questions. And fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so because this will probably lead into what you're going to say next, and also having to ask for the forward and stuff like that. But Kevin's question is really interesting in terms of how it relates to the football side of things as well. And I'll get this right with my my phone here. Hold on one second. Here we go. Okay.
Hi, Matt. This is Kevin Campbell. I'm glad to have you on the Highbury squad with our Sophie. Amanda can't be there, and I can't be there either. My question to you is, do you think it's Arsene Wenger's inside knowledge of the Clairefontaine system that gave him the upper hand when he first came to the Arsenal? I think that's a good question for you. What's your thoughts on that, mate? Listen, have a great show and take good care, and hopefully speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
We love Super Kev. And
well, honoured first and foremost to have Kevin Campbell asking me a question. I have to say, I was a young lad going to Highbury back in the day, celebrating his goals, and top man. So thank you for asking me a question, Kevin. And it is a good question. And Clairefontaine played a massive part in French football, getting ahead of the game in the 90s in particular. They had a pretty average centre of excellence that was in Vichy in the centre of France, and they moved that in 1988. French football's been through some pretty rough times. In the 70s, it was disastrous, and then Platini carried them. They had some other good players, but they won the Euros in 84. But they basically decided to have a massive revamp. In 88, they set up these fantastic academies. Clairefontaine was not just about youth development; it was about having a sort of central hub for sort of brainstorming and deciding what strategy French football was going to take in terms of training coaches, training youngsters, installing methods at clubs. So while Arsene wasn't at Clairefontaine as such, while he wasn't one of the coaches at Clairefontaine, he received the training like all French coaches, all professional French coaches receive. So they go there, they get taught all these same methods. So already they would have been talking about diet, preparation, and all of that. So I think Arsene would have had significant influence from Clairefontaine, but I think he took it to different levels as well, because I think he had a lot of his own ideas. He'd obviously studied economics. His wife, who he met in Monaco, was also sports lady who was very interested in sports science as well. So I mean, it was a very intellectual way. Already he was looking, I think, far more than a lot of other French coaches were in terms of how to sort of train young footballers and bring them through. And what he has that a lot of the others don't have is that personal side. He's able to talk to an 18-year-old Liliane Thuram who's just come from a tough estate south of Paris and sort of relate to him. And and that's incredible. That's what I think so few French coaches actually have. And perhaps one of the problems in French football as well, in that we've got a lot of sort of your white middle class coaches who've had a certain background talking to these kids who are from totally different backgrounds. But Arsene has that very worldly way of being able to, whether he's in Japan, in Monaco, in Paris, in Arsenal, whatever, he seems to be able to interpret what somebody needs to hear.
Yeah, he can, even though he's on an elevated level as a coach, and also, in terms of his intelligence, he can connect with people on any level. And I think that's the beauty of Arsene. You mentioned Liliane. I wouldn't mind his son playing up front for Arsenal if O believes Kris. But a name that you mentioned, and he's also in the book, and Kris, these are two players I remember when they came to, even when Arsene came, everyone was like, Arsene who, of course. And then he makes two signings in Emmanuel Petit and Patrick Vieira. And at the time, it was very much who, and a little bit, dartboardy by media and some opposing fans. But obviously, we now know the legend. And if there's one player I wish that would have stayed at Arsenal longer, it would have been Petit Kris. I think that he left way, way too soon. And I do believe he does have regrets, and Matt can correct me on that or not. But let's talk about Petit a little bit and then get into kind of his conversation with Matt for the book as well. Because for me, he had unfinished business at our club.
Yeah, and I think he's one of the few that has been very vocal about the state of the club since he's left. He's been very, very open in saying that he believes we're not in a great place at the moment, and quite critical at times. And I think he's got a lot of stick for that. But I think the points he's made have been very fair. As a player, I will never forget the song, of course. That was probably one of the greatest songs ever been sung on an Arsenal terrace. Google it, people. It's probably not very children friendly. But he I think a lot of people, again, when he was signed, a lot of people didn't know a lot about him. I touched on it earlier on, but he was kind of known in his youth career as more of a left back and a sort of a defensive player. And he also had a really bad mullet in his days at Monaco. Do Google that as well. But when he signed it, it was Arsene who sort of made this man out to be the midfielder that we needed, and it so turned out to be. And I think what was brilliant about that partnership, I'll never forget the title or the headline after France won the World Cup, and it was Arsenal win the World Cup. And it was that Vieira Petit axis, and that goal, the third goal, the clinching or sort of the cherry on the icing in the World Cup final. I just remember sitting back sort of proudly as an Arsenal fan going, yes, my boys. And they had this link up that was fantastic. And I genuinely don't think there was a better central midfield pairing in world football at that particular time. They just complemented each other so well. And I think Manu was so crucial in how mentioned Remy Gard's influence earlier on, but Petit as well was so influential on developing Patrick's game, not just from a sort of technical perspective, but his maturity and how he played the game. He was never rushed as a player, Petit, and never felt like he was rushed. And I think he was a player that, I think he's one of those players you look back on now and you realise how good he was. And I think at the time people went, oh yeah, he's kind of our midfield, but much like Gilberto Silva was. It's only afterwards and after the player leaves that you look back and you go, actually, he was crucial. And I think your point about him leaving too early, I think was it Barcelona that eventually sent him, like all of our players seemingly at that point. I do feel like he did go a bit too soon, and I do wonder where we would have been if we'd just kept him those extra 2 years. But yeah, I saw him live on a couple of occasions, and for a man he's a big guy and he just glides. He was very much, again, like Patrick. He seemed to eat up the earth, as it were, in terms of his running style. Brilliant in the tackle. I've never seen a guy make slide tackles where you'd look at and you think he's never going to make that. Much like Laurent Blanc, the long legs. He was just a player that could pull the ball out from seemingly nowhere and then start an attack off in midfield. But yeah, brilliant player, and the influence he had on Patrick was huge. So I've been intrigued to know what Matt thinks of his career, and obviously what he said in the book.
Well, you're right, Chris, that the influence he had on Patrick was huge. But I would say the other way around as well. I think they were just ideal, because I think Manu Petit, although he is older than Vieira. He was quite an emotional guy. A little, unstable is not the right word, but he's had a difficult life. He was traumatized by the death of his brother at a young age, and he does a lot of radio and TV now, and people, he's a lovely, engaging guy, but he always gets sort of ribbed by the others for just going off on tangents and just talking about like his philosophy of life, and he was a bit like that when I interviewed him. It was quite funny because he was sort of a bit, okay, do we have to do this? And then once he started talking about football, he was just so much passion, and you felt like I was sort of like still going. It's like, we've been going for an hour here, and I wasn't expecting this. So yeah, brilliant. And what a footballer! I remember at the time when we signed him, I was almost a little bit disappointed because I really liked Stephen Hughes, who had a good left foot and was starting to play quite well for Arsenal. And I thought, this French guy looks a bit one-paced. Why he's just gonna drop Stephen Hughes? And then with hindsight, I think Arsene knew what he was doing. And yeah, fantastic partnership. I think Emmanuel Petit, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he does probably regret not staying at Arsenal longer, just because it didn't go well for him. If it had gone great at Barcelona, he wouldn't have regretted it. But even the last few months at Arsenal, it was kind of like his head had been turned. And I remember the UEFA Cup final; it wasn't a happy game for him. So it does leave a bit of a bitter taste, I think, for him and for Arsenal fans, because we had so many great sort of times with him that it ended like that. And then Arsene, I think Manu would have been happy to come back, wanted to come back to Arsenal, and Arsene decided it was time to sort of move on and look at younger players. So we ended up, at a place we would rather he didn't end up. But
it's really interesting because for me, Thierry Henry is probably Thierry and Dennis probably the single most important signings from a longevity point as well. But also for me, Patrick and Manu, I think Chris nailed it. They're my favorite midfield partnership. I know we had wondrous players, especially in that 2004 season and others, but them combined. And if there's one thing that we can actually thank Piers Morgan for, is that headline on the front of the Daily Mirror, Arsenal win the World Cup. But let's do a little bit of Giroud as well, because if we talk about law, if we talk about players who have really been respected by Arsenal fans, respected by the media, this player doesn't fall into that category. And for me, he's probably one of the most underrated, unappreciated, disrespected Arsenal players of all time, and that is Olivier Giroud. I just don't think people understand his game, his attitude for sure. I know he went through a bit of a tough period, and I'm going to forgive him for the Europa League shenanigans because, you know, like him, like the Ox, you know, like Nasri, like Robin Van Persie, they won. You can't argue with their decision making and what they did based on the team that they were in at the time. But Giroud, even at international level, seems to be disrespected. And there's the whole Benzema argument, and Benzema is superb. Now, in a long-winded way, Matt, I'm asking you, am I right or wrong about Giroud? And if there's another player that I felt didn't really want to leave Arsenal, it's him.
Yeah, I know you're right. You're totally right. He's very underappreciated in France. He gets a lot of criticism. France have got so many top quality strikers. A lot of people, perhaps who don't follow Olivier Giroud or even follow football as much as we do, can't understand why Olivier Giroud is France's. It's not just he's France's first choice striker. Since Didier Deschamps took charge in 2012, he's the guy who has been picked more than any other player. And I think that speaks volumes of who Olivier Giroud is and just what a determined, bloody-minded guy he is. I wouldn't be surprised if Timo Werner turns up at Chelsea and it kind of brings Giroud to another level and he can't actually get in the team, because that's what he's thrived on throughout his career. The more people knock him, the more people say you're not up to it, the more he responds. And I mean, there are two things. The Benzema thing, which is very unfortunate because Giroud gets blamed for Benzema not being in the French national team, and it's not Giroud who's making the decisions. It's not Giroud who got, you know, I love Karim Benzema, the footballer, but you can't deny the fact that there have been off-field scandals, problems. And, you know, sadly for him, he has made it almost impossible for Didier Deschamps to pick him. And Didier Deschamps' family suffered because of accusations of racism stuff, which were fueled indirectly by comments that Karim Benzema made. Anyway, we're not going to get too much into Karim Benzema. What a footballer. And it's a shame for France that he's not there. But Giroud is there. And Giroud, I think he's third top scorer now in France's history, only behind Platini and Henry. So he's doing fairly well. And you know what? The World Cup's quite interesting as well, because Didier Deschamps picked the team for the opening game that everyone wanted him to pick. He left Giroud on the bench. He left Matuidi on the bench. He played Tolisso, the young Tyro in midfield. He played Dembele, Mbappé, and Griezmann in attack. And it was awful against Australia. With 20 minutes to go, he put Giroud and Matuidi on. And just by having, you know, a big focal point in attack at last, somebody to cause some problems to the Australian defence, it changed everything. And France managed to scrape a win. And Giroud played every game. And people will say, oh, he didn't even score a goal, didn't get a shot on target, which is a stat that I'm not totally in agreement with, because there were a couple of shots that could be deemed shots on target. But anyway, he played a massive part, no question. He played a massive part in France winning the World Cup. And he's done it. He's a world champion, and Yeah. And Kris, would you agree that of all the French imports that we've had, that Giroud didn't get the love that he deserved?
Aside of Pascal Seagal, I'm joking.
Yeah, but Kris, we'd take Pascal Seagal now, wouldn't we?
No, you in our defence right now. Trust me. But yeah, point taken. No, I agree. I think Giroud, Matt's nailed it for me. It's again, I wouldn't expect all Arsenal fans to appreciate what he does for France, because again, a lot of English fans probably don't follow France like Matt and myself would. But yeah, he's massively underappreciated. He changes games. He's a very likable fella from the reports sort of I've heard, you know, in the dressing room. And he's quite a good player in terms of sort of motivating and helping out younger players. I think he's a good influence. Yes, he had the off the field troubles, but name me a footballer that doesn't or hasn't. And he was there. And yeah, there was. You look back at it and you think, you know, okay, could he have got more goals? Yeah, but it was the all-round game. It's what he brought to the team, and it's the structure he had. And by the way, he scored some pretty bloody good goals as well. I mean,
he scored some sexy goals, mate. Yes,
he really did. Yeah, and I love that bit of swagger about him. And he was very Gallic. And there's another French in the form of Andre Pierre-Gignac, who's very similar in terms of like his look and his style of play. And he's done a similar thing when he's gone and played in Mexico, and they love him over there. And I think Giroud sort of had that same thing with us when he turned up. He was just sort of that breath of fresh air. And he fired Montpellier to a title as well, which people also would have
certainly did. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love him, and I must admit, when there was talk of him leaving Chelsea, along with a few other players that walked out the door, I did sit there and think, oh, I'd have him back, and I do wonder if that could ever have been explored. But yeah, he's a wonderful footballer, and
I think Arsenal fans did appreciate him a lot and did love him and sung his song all the time. And I think when we went to Stamford Bridge and he was warming up for Chelsea, it was the Arsenal fans singing his name and not the Chelsea fans.
That's true.
But
after he left, Matt.
He left. I said to Giroud, do you not think you should have been born in England? Because actually, you're more like a traditional English. You're a big, strong English centre forward, like we used to have in the day. And Arsenal fans sort of appreciated the fact that he gave his all the time. The French fans sometimes, ignore that and see a bad piece of control or a missed chance and have a go at him. And he gave quite a funny answer. He sort of looked at me and said, "It's true. I am a little bit like Harry Kane in terms of my profile." And I was like, "Well, yeah, you are a little bit like Harry Kane." But anyway, yeah.
Oh, I love his bravado. He's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think the Puskás goal was really what solidified that bravado for us. I think a lot of Arsenal fans saw him differently after that goal, because I don't think a lot of people believed that technically he could score a goal like that. And so for me, it was always interesting that because he wasn't really the fastest player, but positionally, Giroud always kind of made things work whenever he was asked to. And yes, he had bad games and stuff like that, but I don't think they understood his role in the team the same way some French fans don't understand his importance in the French team. And it's not just Deschamps, it's managers before that have played him. And so that's why I feel like he's a very misunderstood player, Matt, in many ways.
Other players look better. There was a time at Arsenal when we had, I think, Cazorla, Walcott, a couple of other sort of smaller players buzzing around him, and it was looking really good. I think it was probably the season that Leicester won the league and Arsenal should have won the league. I think in the latter stages of his Arsenal career, he was on the bench a lot, and I think he was quite a good substitute, quite a good guy to bring on. But personally, I thought it was the right move for everybody. Sort of, he needed to get more game time to get in the French national team. Hasn't necessarily happened at Chelsea, but and I thought Lacazette, again, it's a whole nother debate, Lacazette, but I thought that would be not necessarily a mark up, but a different sort of striker because he's more mobile and quicker. And I thought the way Arsenal were playing, it would be better. And for at times last season, it was better. But yeah, Lacazette's not had the best season this time.
Kris will defend Lacazette till his last breath.
Absolutely.
And I loved watching him when he was playing in Ligue. He's a great player. He really is. But somehow he's lost his way and his confidence has gone. Not sure he gets on well with Arteta, but obviously the injury has had an effect on him coming back. Kris, Lacazette's not in the book, and I do want to get to Pires before we talk a little bit of general about French football and let Matt go. But let's just really quick while we have Matt on. What is wrong with Lacazette? I mean, he does so much more off the ball as much as he does on the ball, but he's not been doing that, and he seems a bit lost. How are you going to defend him at this juncture?
Me or Matt first?
You first, mate.
All right. Well, I'll be brief because I'm sure Matt can give you a bit more insight than I can. But for me, there's two things that Alex Lacazette is struggling with at the moment. One of them is confidence, and the other one is style of play. At Lyon, he was very much the main man, and he had a little fella you might know called Nabil Fekir pulling the strings in behind him in a number 10. We've got a chap who I think he's German. He's on quite a bit of money, I think. I don't know where he went, but that's the sort of player that Lacazette needs, and we haven't got a midfield that is functioning that will give Lacazette that opportunity to thrive. He does look like a player to me who's carrying a bit, whether he's still got a bit of an injury niggle, whether it's just that confidence thing. But that's the big thing for me. He looks short of confidence, and he looks like a player who he needs to go on a bit of a run. And it all started when he got that injury. He was getting a lot of flack at the back end of the season before, and he got that injury, and then they had the surgery done, and he came back, and then he looked a little bit more sprightly. And I just feel that, unfortunately, we've got two best mates in him and Aubameyang who obviously get on brilliantly off the pitch. And if this was 1996, 97, you could play 2 up front, 4-4-2. I think we'd thrive. But the problem is we don't really have that. Aubameyang probably would rather play through the middle, and Lacazette would probably rather be an out-and-out centre forward with somebody alongside him. And I just don't feel that our midfield, it just isn't set up well for Laka. And if we had a player like Fekir, Fabregas back in the day, even sort of Freddie and Robert down the wing, where you'd have that sort of option of pulling it back. Lacazette is an instinctive finisher. He's a player that will patrol that penalty box, and he's also decent from in and around the penalty box as well, from outside the box. He's not blessed with blistering pace, but what he is a finisher, and we're not playing to his strengths at all, in my opinion, at the moment. And that was so evident on Sunday's game for me. He just looks like a player who it just isn't being fed. We're not set up for him.
Matt, it's really true, isn't it, that some players, they're judged on so much of what fans just see in the immediate, in the immediate game. But what Kris is saying is true. A lot of players live and die by the system that they play in or the manager that they play for. What's your take on Laka?
I think Kris has summed it up really well. I think the system is a big problem, but I mean, Lacazette has still had chances that he's not put away. He's not got that sharpness back. It's confidence, it's sharpness. It's a combination of factors. I think you wonder about his attitude. I mean, he's not had attitude problems in the past. He was always well respected at Lyon. But you know, sometimes I look at the teams that Arteta picks week in, week out, and he's picking Pepe again now. But Pepe as well, he's left him out quite a lot. He's played Nketiah, and we all want Eddie Nketiah to do really well. But in terms of the strikers they are at the moment, Lacazette is a far more rounded, mature. He's an international striker, and that's normal, and he should be playing week in, week out. But he's not. Does that mean he's not buying into the project as much as Arteta would like? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, what Kris is saying about the midfield is absolutely spot on. That's, I think, and we talk a lot about the defence, but I think the midfield is one of Arteta's biggest challenges to try to get right.
Is that why too we're seeing, like, for example, I think we've all been harsh on Pepe. He's still young. He comes with a high price tag, and that's never a good thing for any young player. But I think we have also seen that when he's supported, in that right back, Ashley Maitland-Niles the other day, you could see that he felt more protected. He had to do less defensively, but at the same time, they supported each other really well. Is Pepe suffering the same a little bit as Laka in terms of system versus talent?
Yeah, I think that's right, Sophie. I mean, we saw against Sheffield United when Maitland-Niles was playing on the right hand side and had the legs to bomb on outside him. And I'm a big Hector Bellerin fan, but at the moment, physically he's still not quite there. He just still doesn't seem to quite have the pace he had. Doesn't seem to have the sort of stamina to bomb up and down the right. Focuses on defending. And Pepe is a player who needs the ball played ahead of him. He needs the balls to run onto. 95% of the balls he gets at Arsenal are with his back to goal. So he'll control it. He'll jink inside. We'll see if there are things on. But the time it takes to do all that, there's generally nothing on, and he passes it backwards. So he had to adapt at Arsenal to a totally different style of football again, a different league. Lille were a brilliant counter-attacking team last season, and he was their main weapon. He's phenomenal on the counter-attack. He's so fast, he's so technical, and we just haven't seen enough of that. Of course, teams aren't going to come out and attack Arsenal and leave space for them, but there must be ways of creating space in behind for Nicola Pepe, and we saw that a little bit against Sheffield United.
Yeah, and what I do like, Freddie, though, is that Arteta believes in him, and the club believe in him, and we've made a huge investment in him, and you can see that. And I think with more consistency in terms of he went through phases where he wasn't picked with Emery, Arteta wasn't picking him at the beginning, but hopefully he should be one of the first players on the team sheet now, in terms of the talent that we have. And Kris, another player, and just to circle it back to Matt's book, Sacré Bleu, which you can buy on Amazon, and Matt will give us all the details at the end where you can find the book, is Robert Pires. Look at that. C'est magnifique. And I can order a glass of red wine in French, so that's good. So those are my two contributions. Très bien. Pires, Pepe, we all want our players to be our ex-players, the players of the past, you know. And I think sometimes that comes with an insurmountable amount of pressure, especially when you're a super young player. But a player that is in Matt's book and a player that we all fell in love with, Mr. Robert Pires. What's your take on Pires, Kris? Where does he rank in terms of your favourite French players that played at Arsenal? And then I'd love for Matt to give us a little anecdote on Pires and a little, you know, a little bit from the book on that one.
Yeah, he's right up there. He's right up there. Definitely intrigued by Matt's thoughts on Robert. When he first sort of broke through the scene, initially at Metz, kind of a wiry, he's quite an unusual winger in the fact that he's quite tall. And before the days of sort of Ronaldo coming through on the wing, he's quite a tall, leggy character. And a lot of people, when they first meet him in person, are like, "Christ, actually, you're quite a big lad." But yeah, he was very much a bit of a raw gem in the Mets side. When he went to Marseille that he started catching the attention, and that was when Arsenal picked him up. And I do remember the first season that he signed. There's that famous story in many Arsenal books about him being on the bench at Sunderland and Arsene Wenger saying, you know, this is Premier League football, and Robert's face was a bit of a picture. And I think he looked at that and thought, Christ, I'm not sure I fancy this. But it was once he'd settled in, and it's always the argument I go back to whenever everyone sort of mentions Pepe or any new signing. I always say, think about Robert Pires, think about Dennis Bergkamp. It took them time, and I think a lot of people forget that it takes players time to adjust, not just to the football but also off the pitch. And Robert was, to me, I've never met him personally, sadly, but he always came across to me as quite a shy, a quiet individual, and he didn't strike me as the sort of player who would be sort of out in the town and mixing in massive social circles when he first came. So he did take a bit of adapting, but once he'd adapted, what a player, what a footballer. And the goals that sort of stand out, the one at Anfield stands out, but to me the one that I loved the most was the change of feet at Spurs when he scored that goal, and I think it's in was it the title winning game? I can't actually remember. I think it was. But when he switched feet on from one leg to the next and slid it under the goalkeeper, that was the Pires that I love, because he just had so much technical ability. And for a player who, if you watched him run, you'd think, is he even a footballer? Such a strange style, the kind of the duck feet thing. But yeah, he was strong, he was quick, he would get you a goal, he would get you an assist. He was a brilliant second assister. He was always sort of at the heart of every move down that left-hand side or cutting in. And just a breathtaking footballer to watch. And again, had the privilege of doing just that in the flesh. I do remember him changing the game for us against, I think it's against Aston Villa one game. I remember watching in the absolutely pouring rain. And he was just, not only was he the most handsome individual, but just a beautiful footballer to watch.
Was that when he lobbed Schmeichel? Was that the game at Villa?
The goal kick. Yeah.
That was
I mean, Matt, we had so many. I think we didn't even realize how lucky we were at the time that we had these players, and world class in every position. It was unbelievable, and he was really quite special, wasn't he?
He was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And what's a bit strange, even in his sort of international career, he was kind of in Zidane's shadow, and at Arsenal he was a bit in Bergkamp's shadow. What I will say first of all is that he's not only a phenomenal football player, but people say don't meet your heroes. Robert Pires is one guy I've been really lucky to actually get to know, and he's just the loveliest, most unassuming, normal person you could want to meet. And he's also a massive Arsenal fan, and I think we know that, and we realise that because he still goes to training, but you know he's really involved, and not just in a kind of showy way. I want to talk about this on TV. He genuinely loves Arsenal Football Club, even like post Arsene Wenger. So I was absolutely delighted to meet him. Met up in London. We had a really long chat about his whole career with France, with Arsenal. His best season was when he was Player of the Year in 2001-2, and he had that horrible knee injury a couple of months before the end of the season. I remember feeling quite emotional when he came on to the pitch at Highbury when they lifted the trophy, and he was on crutches wearing his tracksuit, and all the players were bowing down to him. And I thought that was cool. Seeing such a genius of a footballer on crutches like that, and it was, and the day you won the league, it was all kind of too much for me, but also for France. it was massively important because sadly for them, he missed that World Cup. Zidane, it was all about Zidane's injury. Will he be able to play? Won't he be able to play? France were absolutely abysmal. And they were world champions. They went to the Far East, to Korea, didn't score a goal. And, when I interviewed Lilian Thuram, I was talking a lot about Zidane with him. And it was actually him who brought that up. He said, you're forgetting one thing, Robert's injury. Because if Robert's not injured there, that World Cup's a different story. And I think he's totally right. And it's a shame because that would have been his moment.
Wow. I love those kind of anecdotes, and it's true. And just to get back to the heart of your book, that World Cup was beyond disastrous. It was embarrassing for French football, wasn't it? But the way they bounced back, and I love the title of your book because from you go from Zidane to Mbappé, and one of the things. And again, you guys can tell me if I'm off base, and I think we have to get you out on this one, Matt. But we're going to have to do a part 2 on this one because there's way too much to talk about. Is Thierry Henry, Zidane, they've won everything at every level internationally and also, for their clubs. Why aren't Thierry and Zizou in the mix of that conversation when everyone keeps talking about Maradona or Pele or Ronaldo or Messi? And of course, Ronaldo and Messi are special players, but I think sometimes we forget about some of the players that were sandwiched in the middle of that. And for me, Zidane, technically one of the greatest players I've ever seen play the game. Before we get you out, talk to me a little bit about that, and obviously the influence and also the debacle of Zidane in that final when he headbutted, and what France's legacy could have been as we sit here today. Yeah,
they're big subjects. I've got a few more minutes, but no. In France, and I think outside of France, he's regarded as Zidane is regarded as the best player of his generation. I think what is very curious is that he never struck up a good relationship on the pitch with Henry in terms of finding each other on the pitch. There's no reason why they shouldn't have been telepathic, why they shouldn't have, but something didn't quite happen, and there were issues. I think between them, I think Thierry was always a bit frustrated that he was kind of number 2 in France. He was tearing it up in the Premier League, but he was always kind of number 2 to Zidane, and Zidane didn't give him the service that Bergkamp gave him, and he only provided his first assist. I think it was the 57th game they'd played together, and that was in the World Cup in 2006, the free kick against Brazil that Henry put in at the far post. But no, Zidane, absolutely unbelievable. The whole story about him retiring and coming back, and was he running the team? Was Dominic just basically a puppet by this stage? Zidane had an immense impact. Everybody tells me that Dominic was very much the manager, and you mustn't write that Zidane was the manager. But Dominic admits he changed a lot of the way that he was running things because of Zidane, because he knew he had to keep him happy, and it was thanks to Zidane that France turned it around and got to the final. His last ever game, he was planning to go out by winning the World Cup. It was all kind of getting away from him. And he was as that World Cup went on, he was being deified more and more in France. This was just the god who could do no wrong. And he just cracked, extra time, the tension, feeling that, France were not going to win this game. And he suddenly, had a moment of weakness where he became the boy, the angry young boy from Castellane, the suburb he grew up in Marseille, and Materazzi was allegedly insulting his mother and sister, and Zidane went for it, and Raymond Domenech's still angry to this day that he feels the video was used because he thinks the linesman and the referee, both of them missed it, and it was the fourth official who had a screen who saw it. But France can't complain too much about that. But it's just one of these unbelievable stories. 4 years later in South Africa, it's they hit rock bottom. Zidane is long gone. Henry is still there, incredibly, having a sort of very much a watching role because he was only a substitute under Domenech and had basically decided he wanted nothing to do with what was going on in that World Cup. And they ended up going on strike, massive disgrace. And kind of France's resurgence started in 2010 because they thought we've got to tear all this up and start again. And that's where they're at now. So it remains to be seen whether we're going to now start sliding towards another disastrous period. You mentioned the Euros at the beginning, Sophie. They've got they've got the players who are at the right age now to go on and create a legacy, and that's what Arsene says in the foreword to the book. He says that if they can get the balance, the talent's there. They've got the strong players in the key positions, and France can dominate. Of course, there are other good teams. You never know, but they're going to be there or thereabouts for a while, I think, France.
Wow, and a great place to, I think, end the convo today. Even though Kris and I could keep you here for 3 hours, we'll serve some food. Pop open a bottle of wine. I could listen to you forever, Matt. Just so fantastic. That's very nice, Sophie.
The thing is, if you want to talk about Arsenal and French football with me, you need like at least 6 or 7 hours. Because
I know. Let's
1 hour
schedule that part 2, Kris. Are you up for it?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. And because I wanted to get into the younger player pool with you a little bit, kind of rewinding back to when Arsene was dipping in, but now and what that could mean going forward. So I really do want to do like a second part, but thank you so much for joining today. And Kris, also thanks to you. And I appreciate the loan from the boys at A Bergkamp Wonderland. And Matt, good luck with the book. Now tell everyone where they can buy the book, where they can find you. And yes.
Okay. Sacré Bleu, here it is. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Spiro. You can buy the book. I would suggest going to Bite Back Publishing. Their website has you can buy online through their website. You can go to bookshops now. Apparently in the UK they're open again. Amazon, will have it as well. But it's good to support what is a fairly small publishing house that did a great job with me. I was really pleased that they took the book on. So Bite Back Publishing. Order the book. There are still copies available, I can reassure you. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. There's plenty of Arsenal in there. We didn't even mention David Dean, who very kindly invited me into his place to talk about sort of the whole influence of French football, on England. And I was going to mention, when you're talking about Manu Petit, David Dean told me about, he was at the Stade de France when they won the World Cup, and in one of the VIP seats, and Manu walked past him when he was walking up to win the World Cup, and they just looked at each other. David didn't know what to say, and he said, "Quelle saison, Manu, quelle saison," and they had a big hug. So that was nice.
Cool. Okay, well then we'll have to do that in part 2 for sure, because David Dean was a massive, massive influence on our club. And you can also listen to Kris on A Bergkamp Wonderland at AFC Podcast. Make sure you check out those guys. Really authentic and always some genuinely honest conversation. Thanks again, lads. Really enjoyed having you today. Take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Cheers.